In this study of Genesis 1, I have given three distinct interpretations for Genesis 1, verses 1 through 31. One literal 24-hour day creation, the gap theory interpretation, and the time dilation coupled to theistic evolution version, showing God genetically modifying all life forms from 3.5 billion years ago to the present, through all the geologic periods of Earth's fossil record. The first question I have, was it 6 days or 16 billion years? As Pastor Chuck Smith said, there are many fine men of God who teach that the earth is young, having only been created less than 10,000 years ago. One of their strong arguments in favor of a young earth comes from Exodus chapter 20, verse 11, which states, "For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them." But as we will see in this study, 6 days by whose frame of reference? If it's from God's frame of reference outside of space-time, taking into account Einstein's laws of relativity and time dilation, we will clearly see those 6 days amounted to 15.75 billion years, as observed from our frame of reference, not from God's frame of reference. According to those who promote the gap theory, a whole series of recreations of life have taken place after multiple extinction-level events. So according to this gap theory, a specific 6-day recreation of life can easily have taken place, using Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 through 31 as a template for the literal 6-day creation account as well. One template fitting neatly within the larger template. For Genesis 1, that of the 6 periods of time or epochs which add up to 15.75 billion years. So regardless of which timing interpretation we're looking at, it doesn't matter. The irreducible complexity found within the living cell proves creation and intelligent design took place at the cellular level and all at once, whether that was in 6 days as we count time, or 3.5 billion years ago as a geologist found. Here's another interesting twist. Genesis 1, verses 1 through 31 was written as a type of poetic Hebrew, not literal Hebrew. One biblical scholar from way back in the 1890s and early 1900s, who evangelicals widely respect, named Milton S. Terry, literally wrote the book on biblical hermeneutics, with a book by that title. Bible scholars look to him as the one who originated the historical grammatical method of hermeneutics or interpretation. What many of them don't know is that he also wrote a book called Biblical Apocalyptics, in which, while using those now standard methods, he identified the first 11 chapters of Genesis as Hebrew apocalyptics. That is, a form of ancient literature that uses figures and symbols more than historical realities to convey its message. So that's one reason to consider those chapters in a non-literal sense, so that we can instead focus on what the writer was really trying to say. In the case of Genesis 1, you have a framework being used that shows 3 days of forming, followed by 3 days of filling. All this contributes to a picture the writer is giving us in figurative form rather than historical or scientific, long before anyone had our modern concept of history or science. And it was Fred Heron that gave this description, and he wrote the book Show Me God. I've got another question, part 3 here. Why were all the life forms so vicious and competitive? Dog eat dog. And if you don't think so, take a look at the T-Rex. By observation of the geologic record coupled to the biblical teachings about angels and the devil, what one man has proposed and postulated is that God used the angels who followed Lucifer to theistically evolve, create, bioengineer the various life forms from beginning to end, right up to but not including what God created within the Garden of Eden. If so, this probably took place after God created the first living cell, that cell with its DNA being highly complex. Thus the cell had to have been created all at once and by God himself, and is discovered in Wiluna, Western Australia. Cyanobacteria fossils were found dating back to 3.5 billion years ago, the first living cells to appear in the fossil record. Then, through genetic gene switch throwing, all life forms to follow essentially were GMOs, genetically modified organisms, from the Precambrian period right up through all the other periods of time, including the bioengineering of primitive man. It's my guess that inside the Garden of Eden, all life forms, including that of Adam and Eve, were created directly by God within 6 literal days, again all living within the confines of the garden, wherever that was. Outside the garden were all the life forms we find in the Quaternary period, including early man, Denisovans, Neanderthals, Australopithecines, with some lines dying off in obvious competition beforehand, others melding in with the last development, the Homo sapiens. DNA from Denisovans and Neanderthals have been found in the modern DNA of humans. So God's fingerprints of intelligent design and Satan's fingerprints in the predatory killing nature of these life forms both appear in the record of the rocks. This study goes from the beginning of the Big Bang, 15.75 billion years ago, taking us through all the various eons, epochs, and periods in the geologic record of the rocks, filling in many details about the life forms that appeared along the way. At the beginning of this study, I have taken the time to explain Einstein's time dilation laws as they fit into the 6 days of creation, as seen outside space-time from God's perspective where he was at the time of creation. Then during the time span of each time dilation day, I have recorded the various details of creation as found in the geologic record of the rocks, including interesting videos and hypertext links to the various life forms found in that record of the rocks. For the geologic backbone of this study, I used Professor Andrew H. Null's book, A Brief History of Earth, 4 billion years and 8 chapters. This study that I've put together on Genesis 1 postulates that after God created the first irreducibly complex cell, he then passed on the design schematics for those life forms that followed to his angelic realm under Lucifer. And if that is so, it was that angelic realm who modified that first living cell into all the life forms which followed in the geologic record of the rocks. That first living cell with its irreducibly complex DNA, RNA, and ribosome-manufactured proteins must have been created by God himself. The modification that took place afterward was by genetic gene switch throwing, changing the genetic code of the DNA found in the first living cells. This brought about all the various life forms to follow, which we see in the record of the rocks. Enjoy the study? It's thorough. I tried not to miss much. That's it for now. Be sure to look this up on unityinchrist.com and read this article on Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 through 31, Earth and Universe, created in 6 days. Find out by reading.